10 hours straight. He's a machine. I know Kung Fu.
Show me.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and today's episode is a close one to my heart because the Matrix films are so very close to my heart. There's a little bit of a personal story in why I love the Matrix film franchise so much, and really that first movie for really sparking a kind of imagination in me. Well, the close thing to my heart is that the Matrix films are the reason my wife and I met. Like literally the reason why she and I met. We have a shared interest in the Matrix. Granted, the fandom was a lot stronger 20 years ago. You know, that's an odd thing to say, but granted, 20 years ago. So, you know, the first movie came out in 1999, The Matrix. And then in 2003, the Wachowski siblings, now sisters, released the second and the third one, The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions. And just this year, I guess technically 2021, not this year anymore, because this episode is being recorded and will come out in 2022. So last year, in December, they released the fourth of the franchise, the fourth film of the franchise, The Matrix Resurrections. And that was directed by Lana Wachowski, one of the two sisters. So we have 4 films in the film franchise, and this episode is really going to focus on the first one primarily. I'll mention things about how ideas and themes and psych concepts go from one film to the next, but really it all stems from that first film. Most of the narrative and the concepts and all sorts of those things come from that first movie that we'll dive into in the next segment. So this film and these films are very important to me. I will say though that even though it just came out, there is a spoiler alert for Matrix Resurrections, or excuse me, The Matrix Resurrections. So I'm going to spoil it because I'm disappointed in it. I'm very disappointed in it. It should not have been made. I don't know if I've read a good rationale as to why it was made. I think the story as we knew it ended with Revolutions, the third one. I don't know what this movie adds to the lore in a way that makes sense of the previous 3 films. Like it sort of undoes some of the aspects of the previous 3 films. So I wasn't really a fan of how they did it. And I feel like the ending, if you saw the movie, I feel like the ending ended abruptly. It just ended. There's nothing there that says, okay, this story was wrapped up. It feels like a Matrix 5 was gonna be there. Or maybe even a 5 and a 6 to continue the story. But I honestly don't think that is the case. And with the poor box office return, the loss of money that Warner Brothers took to make this 4th movie, there's definitely not going to be a fifth movie. If I know movie business, that's pretty much the case. That is pretty much the case. So, like I said, it was directed by the Wachowski siblings. So, in 1999, they were the Wachowski brothers. They are trans women, and so their pronouns are she, her. We're going to get into the transgender allegory that makes up really the backbone of this set of films. So we're going to get into that in the next segment. That's the one that I'm putting definitely at the top. So going through transition in in the late 90s through the 2000s, and came out as trans. I want to say shortly after, or around the time that the second and third movie came out. So early, mid 2000s, somewhere around there. So Lana Wachowski and Lily Wachowski, I want to make sure that I got their names right. Obviously, the cast is iconic. Look at that. They are icons in each of their own ways, except for maybe Cypher. Joe Pantoliano, Joey Pants, as he's called. I've called him Joey Pants on this show before. He just looks like that. That's what Joe Pantoliano looks like. But, look at these three. These three. Iconic. Iconic. Obviously, we know this group. Keanu Reeves, Neo. In many respects, the movie that launched him not into stardom. He was already a star by then, but kind of sort of launched him into super stardom. There's there are those movies that go, okay, yeah, that's a leading guy. People like him, and to like Fresh Prince, Will Smith. Right? He does Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the show, and he was in a couple of movies around that same time. 6 Degrees of Separation was one of them, but so he was known, and then Independence Day, boom, that kind of thing. So I'm pretty sure Keanu Reeves really owes his superstardom to this movie and the training that he got to be able to do roles like Constantine, which was really physical, obviously John Wick, so on and so forth, right? Then we have Lawrence Fishburne. I mean, come on. Lawrence Fishburne. Come on. There's nothing bad to say about this guy. He is a phenomenal actor. Obviously, the last of the Trinity is Trinity. Carrie-Anne Moss. Lovely. I really do enjoy her Marvel Netflix character of Terry Hogarth. She was really good in that. But anyways, phenomenal at Trinity, of course. Phenomenal as Trinity. Other folks that are super famous because of this role and this role alone, we've got Hugo Weaving. No, he was famous. He was Elrond, of course, after that. But Hugo Weaving, Agent Smith. Oh my God. Amazing. And Joe Pantoliano, as I said, plays a foil, Cypher. We'll talk about Cypher in a little bit. And then, a few other characters here and there. And then some additional stars were added in the follow-up films, Reloaded and Revolutions. Truth be told, while The Matrix is top 5 film of all time for me, I actually like the action in Reloaded far more. I know some of it looks like goofy CG, especially the All Smiths battle on Neo in the schoolyard. And some of it looks really cartoony, but 2003. It's not terrible. So, but it is of the 4, it is the best. To me, it has the best action. It also has a heist element to it that I really like, with getting into the architect's a little control room thing, a little heist element to it. I really enjoy that. And the freeway that they built. So while The Matrix as a whole is top 5 film for me, Reloaded is not a top 5 film. It's actually somewhere. It has the best action of the franchise. That's what I'll say there. So a couple of other additional names that were added in further films include Jada Pinkett Smith as Niobe, and a few other people. Perhaps Reloaded, the 2003 MTV Movie Awards had my favorite parody intro bit. When award shows used to do parody intro bits. God bless Billy Crystal. He's so good, and he made those pretty standard. Anyways, Justin Timberlake and Sean William Scott doing the MTV Movie Awards parody of The Matrix Reloaded was chef's kiss, dear listeners. Chef's kiss. So, I mean, it was a good movie to follow up on. Anyways, there's not really more to say about the films without jumping directly into the meat of the bones, the meat on the bones, so to speak. So let's just jump right into the psyche of the Matrix film franchise. So the first thematic psych idea / concept that I want to talk about to kick us off for this episode is what the writers and directors, the Wachowskis, have said about the films after they came out. So there wasn't a lot of talk about the film's meaning right after it came out. I think what was what everybody else was talking about. I mean, they put so many things in it. Like, there are a ton of things that I wrote down today that I had to cut down. I was like, I can't. I'd be, this is going to be a 2-hour long episode or something like that. So it cuts things down. And so there's a lot of meaning in the movies themselves that people could find elsewhere. But the main thing that I wanted to talk about to start the episode here was the trans allegory that the Wachowskis have recently, I would say in the last 15 or so years, 10 to 15 years, have confirmed it, have said that it is an allegory for their own struggles, their own grapple with their transitions. For those that don't know, the Wachowskis are trans women, Lana and Lily, and they used the story of the Matrix to essentially verbalize and make art out of their personal struggles. It's a phenomenal thing to have learned later. It's interesting not having an understanding of transgender identities in the early 2000s. I mean, I didn't really know much about it, I will say. Less than 20 years ago, I didn't really know too much about what it meant to be trans, what trans was. So it was not something that I talked about on the internet, on fan forums. It's not something that was discussed at the time. And for it to come out from the horse's mouth, basically, that it is a trans allegory, that it makes it even that much more beautiful. The first movie was written and directed by what you may consider their previous selves. Identities that are no longer who they are, or were masks of who they really were, being in the closet as trans women. And so they kept it hidden as well. And so they used this story to share their struggles. And because they were they're super into like goth and metal and just like this iconic look with the leather and all of that, they were all into that for various reasons. And, you know, it's a really great futuristic style. And of course, The Matrix takes place in the future. And so they added this style and they added guns because they knew people would go and see a movie with guns. And they told their story. I think it's beautiful. And you can find a dime a dozen articles on the internet that explore their exact words in the interviews and where they go on to confirm that trans allegory. But I do want to just point out the details that I found in the movie that point to this allegory. Because again, later in the show, I'm going to talk about other major thematic elements that are grounded in psychological concepts that can also take the place of the trans allegory, or not essentially, not take the place maybe, but more or less be the louder of the set for whomever, whatever. I don't know if that makes sense. So I wanted to jump in with this one because, of course, there are tons and tons of pieces of evidence throughout the movies. And like I said, we're going to focus on the first one because it has by far the most. So first and foremost, let's focus on Neo. In The Matrix, his name is Thomas Anderson. Mr. Anderson. That's my best. That is my best Hugo Weaving Agent Smith. I don't think it gets any better than that, so I'd stop trying.
Mr. Anderson.
All right. So Neo is his quote-unquote alter ego. At least that's what it's presented as at the beginning. You know, his username, his Usenet name, you know, his IRC name or something like that. his early chat handle. So he goes by Neo on, I guess, what we would consider the dark web now, you know, hiding behind a lot of things. You think he's kind of dealing in drugs, and, you know, they're telling him to follow the White Rabbit and stuff like that. And he's like, what are you talking about? And so he sees a White Rabbit, and he goes. He follows that White Rabbit. He meets Trinity. Before I get to Trinity, though, let's go back to Neo and this duality of Thomas Anderson. Thomas Anderson is his quote-unquote name in this world. But he prefers to be called by Neo. And it's not actually a preference. It's more of a demand, right? And since all of us have names, we all sort of demand that we are called by the name that we prefer, that we want to be called by. I shouldn't use the word prefer. And this is one of the clearer examples of the trans allegory throughout the film because it represents the duality of transitioning. It represents one identity to the next because we carry so much in our identity with just a gender. Because with a gender comes norms and expectations. There comes gender expression, right? And then sexual orientation. Gender really carries a lot of weight, and a lot of stuff comes with this. And so it's a massive change. And that duality of Thomas Anderson versus Neo is that duality that exists in transitioning, as far as I'm aware. Of course, I am not trans, so I can't imagine that expectation, but that's how it feels as presented in the film. So Neo and Thomas Anderson. And the whole Mr. Anderson with Agent Smith, Agent Smith here represents this sort of societal pressure of you have biological male parts and hormones, and therefore your gender, it also has to be man. Sort of this like, you don't get to make that choice. That choice was made for you, and you have to deal with it. We all have to deal with it. That's what Agent Smith sort of reflects. Society saying the binary is how we're going to do it. And sorry, you don't get to make the change from what you were assigned. And that's critical there, because when we're talking about what sex letter gets put on your birth certificate, that is sex assigned at birth. Assigned. What does that mean? It means somebody gave you a designation. And of course, who are you to argue? You're just a baby. So the point here is that in this duality, this transition for Neo is the struggle, and then he's got this outside force of Agent Smith constantly calling him Mr. Anderson, Mr. Anderson. It's a process that has been referred to as dead naming, when somebody refuses to accept a new name of a trans woman or a trans man, and so they keep calling them their dead name, their old name, a name of their previous gender. And it's specifically called dead naming when somebody does it with malicious intent. If you accidentally, refer to a recently transitioned person, we'll say like at the time of Caitlyn Jenner's transition, if you accidentally referred to her as Bruce right after the transition, but then you apologize, that's not dead naming. That's not the act of dead naming. Dead naming is malicious intent behind using the wrong name. And Agent Smith constantly dead names Neo. So much so that at the end, or toward the end of their subway brawl, he gets up and he's like, "My name is Neo.
My name is Neo."
You won't get any better. The finest Keanu Reeves impersonator. The finest. Even better than him. Wait. Want to hear? Want to hear?
Whoa.
So good.
I know Kung Fu.
All right. Other examples of the trans allegory, through mainly, like I said, throughout the first movie. Morpheus and Trinity. The sidekicks of all sidekicks are supportive others. They are the ones who let you in, or you let in, to your inner circle. And they want to help the transition. They want to shepherd the new identity to where it needs to be. Of course, Neo becomes the one at the end of the first movie. Kind of the guide through the trials and tribulations that come with non-cisgendered, which is same gender as sex assigned at birth. So our cisgendered society, where men and women are males and females, but also heterosexual societal pressures, right? There's a lot of guff and pain and terror and all sorts of bad vibes for anyone that exists outside we'll call it arbitrary norm. And so Trinity and Morpheus are those. And Maybe they represent real people. I've heard that they all could also represent aspects of one's mind. I'm not going to dive into like the Freudian stuff, but just like aspects of a transition that I'm not really sure of. So I don't know the full extent of their characterization within this allegory, but they sort of act like confidants and guides and things like that. Others with intimate knowledge of the transition or helping find a way, we'll say. Now, one of the ones, the third one that I want to talk about is probably the one that gets the most discussion, I would say, within this allegory, this trans allegory. The idea of the red pill versus the blue pill. A ton of ways you can take this whole thing, but within the allegory itself is the red pill, as it represents to Neo in the Matrix, a tracer that will help them find him in a sea of pods, but really to live freely, right? To live outside of the bounds of whatever mind prison he's been put in, the Matrix, right? The Matrix is the antagonist here. So that's the red pill. But in real life, within the allegory, this is the ability, the choice to live freely as your identity, to be who you are without condition or without fear, right? So that's what the red pill is, to be able to be who you are for whatever that is. Whereas the blue pill represents, going back to some sort of mind prison, to not be who you want to be, to wear a disguise, to wear a mask, to sort of almost be like my son got a Minecraft mask for Halloween. And so it's like you wear this big block head, and it's almost like, since the Matrix is a computer program, we'll just use Minecraft as an example here. It's like everyone has the same Minecraft head, and because it's an 8-bit characterized animation style, there isn't a lot of detail. So you're kind of just like walking through life as the same as everyone else. They really do a good job of showing this, albeit in a different context, in The Construct in the first film, where they're trying to show Neo how anybody can be an agent and to always pay attention. And of course, the lady in the red dress is like, "What about the lady in the red dress?" And he turns around and he's staring at a Desert Eagle of an agent because he wasn't paying attention, blah, blah, blah. But if you notice, everyone around them in this fake scene looks the same. Everyone is the same. And that's what the blue pill really represents. It represents being the same, conforming, doing what you're supposed to do for the sake of doing it for society's sake. Something like that.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress?
I was...
Look again. Freeze it.
So, blue pill, hiding your identity. Obviously, in the trans allegory, it's obviously remaining in the closet, so to speak. Right? Keeping that aspect of your identity hidden, which for a lot of people, is psychologically damaging. To constantly be looking over shoulder, not doing or saying the wrong things, it weighs on a person. That's why it's not healthy to keep secrets. Everywhere you run into, not healthy to keep secrets. Secrets are no fun. Secrets will kill you in the long run. Ah, see? The rhyme, it's rhymes. It means it's true. My last piece on this one is there's a character in the first film, goes by the name of Switch. Now, interesting tidbit that I found at this Vox article. So I was reading through this and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Because there's just one little piece of tidbit that really drives the trans allegory home and the sort of caught between two worlds as epitomized in a character that you're probably not really paying all that much attention to. So there's a character in the first film. Her name is, or her or him or they, I'm not really sure at this point after reading this article. The character of Switch. They are played by a female actor who presents somewhat feminine, a little masculine at from what I can tell, but I don't really know. But in the film, what is in the theatrical release, of course, so what is canon in this universe, Switch is played by a female actor in both the Matrix and in the real world. Very gender fluid kind of expression done by the filmmakers on purpose, of course. But early in the planning of the film, they actually wanted Switch to be played by a man, by a male actor in the real world, to really hit home the idea of residual self-image, and which is something I'll get into in a little while. This idea of who we think we are in the Matrix. I thought that was wonderful. Male actor in the real world, and the woman who ultimately played her, or that character, in Matrix, but ended up being the same person for both because Warner Brothers rejected it. They didn't think audiences would get it, so they had scrapped it. They scrapped that idea. Interesting, right? So the next major theme that I wanted to talk about for this episode was the one that spoke to me as a youngin', which was the religious allegory that is carried throughout the film. And I have to imagine that while the trans allegory was the stated emphasis and broad theme of the films, especially the first one, they had to know that they were building a biblical story where all of the characters neatly, and I mean neatly, even some of the side characters fit neatly into people and aspects in the Bible, the religious stories of Judeo-Christian history. Okay? So obviously it's there. And we'll take the giant elephant in the room, and then we'll take the other giant 3 elephants. Neo. I mean, it's blatant in the first movie, but of course expanded on in the second and third. Resurrections kind of does it again. I'll get to that one in a second. All right, Neo. He's the one. How do I know that? Well, they say it throughout the film quite a bit, but now stay with me. Neo is an anagram for one. Huh? Yeah, you saw that one coming. It's also Latin for new. Little tidbit, my first username on my Matrix forum back in 2003 was Neo means new. Yep, that was my username. It's a pretty solid username because it is Latin for new. Who would have thunk it, right? So I shortened that to NMN. Mouthful there. Shortly after that, because Neo means new just kind of got really annoying to read all the time. So I shortened it. In any case, Neo is the one. Who is the one? Jesus. Jesus Christ. He's obviously the one, right? Trinity. Hold on. This one's hard. What aspect of Judeo-Christian beliefs is Trinity? Yeah, the Holy Trinity. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, or Holy Spirit, depending on how you say it. So obviously the Holy Trinity. And the reason why she, the character, is named Trinity is because she is the one who resurrects Jesus at the end of the first film. She's the one who does it. That's her main reason for being. Morpheus is a shepherd. He is meant to tell the chosen one, you are the chosen one. Gotta love chosen one prophecy stories. Morpheus is a shepherd to kind of shepherd along the chosen one on his path. You know, it's funny. When we talk about Jesus, we talk about him as a baby, like literally his birthday. And then we kind of just fast forward through his life. We don't really know what goes on. You know, how was toddler Jesus? How was middle childhood Jesus? Nobody really talks about that. Right? And until he has his epiphany. He has his epiphany when he talks to John the Baptist. John the Baptist is like, there's this idea that we are meant to see the Lord to do stuff. I'm not going to go into all the stuff that he does, but to do stuff, right? To be God on earth, basically, right? Right. So he has to go through this knowledge, essentially, and that's really what Morpheus does for the most part in the movie. In the beginning part of the movie, Morpheus is basically Mr. Exposition Dump. And he essentially just explains everything about the Matrix to everyone. This is the real world, Neo.
This is the world as it exists today.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
We have
have only bits and pieces of information, but what we know for certain is that at some point in the early 21st century, all of mankind was united in celebration. We marveled at our own magnificence as we gave birth to AI.
AI. You mean artificial intelligence?
A singular consciousness that spawned an entire race of machines. We don't know who struck first, us or them, but we know that it was us that scorched the sky. At the time, they were dependent on solar power, and it was believed that they would be unable to survive without an energy source as abundant as the sun. Throughout human history, we have been dependent on machines to survive. Fate, it seems, is not without a sense of irony.
So, we got the three there. We've got Neo, Morpheus, and Trinity. Also, the three of them. Nice trio, of course. The other interesting tidbit that I want to mention is that there are a few named ships, the floating things as they go through the tunnels of the Earth, that were created by drilling stuff. I don't honestly know how the tunnels were made. The main ship that's named is the Nebuchadnezzar, which is Morpheus' ship, and Nebuchadnezzar is an important biblical figure as well. I don't remember what's important about him off the top of my head, but he's there. I'm pretty sure. So obviously Neo is Christ, right? And he's supposed to free the people of Zion. Okay. I'm pretty on the nose there, right? I mean, this religious allegory is screaming at you. And maybe it was put there to sort of hide the religious allegory. But I don't know why they would want to hide that. So I'm not entirely sure. Maybe they wanted to land better and not be viewed as something deviant. View it as like a Christ journey, a Christ-like journey in a science fiction hellscape kind of thing. That sells better than, hey, this is a trans allegory. So I mean, it screams at you, right? It's Jesus in the computer. The character at the end of Revolutions is called Deus Ex Machina, which is God from the machine, which is a common phrase used these days to represent, some sort of God level change, like a cheat code or something like that. And you're just like, they're saved. Everything is fine now. Like the eagles in Lord of the Rings. They are a Deus Ex Machina because they're literally like, I'm going to pick up the hobbits and then go away and save them or save Gandalf or whatever. Right? So Neo is Christ. Trinity is the Holy Trinity. Morpheus is the shepherd. Okay? Christ is meant to bring down the oppression, to save humanity from sin, the glut of life, etc., etc., and to bring the establishment to its knees, as told in the Gospels, right? And so, essentially, the movie acts as the Gospel according to Morpheus, maybe, and not only to rid the world of the machines, but also free people's minds. And of course, there's a ulterior motive to freeing minds, which is, hey, have you heard the good news, basically? Like, and that's how the first movie ends. Like, I'm gonna tell all these people what you're doing, and then he flies off into space like Superman Jesus. Okay, so what about some other characters and this religious allegory? I mean, who else can we apply? Well, Agent Smith. I don't know about this one. I've seen it a couple of ways, but the one that really sticks out to me is he a representation of the devil, of the temptation of of a beautiful life, but really not beautiful, right? Because for many people, the Matrix is hell. And hell here, going back to the Trans Allegory, is leading a life hiding one's true identity. So Agent Smith sort of represents that kind of devilish agent. Maybe the story of Lucifer. So if you're not familiar, the story of Lucifer, loosely, broadly, Lucifer was an angel, wanted to show God that he was A-okay, and ended up going too far. And God stripped him of his wings and cast him out of heaven. And he was like, fine, I'll make my own place then. And that's where we get this like mixture of ideas about hell and who the devil is and that kind of thing. So it's entirely possible that's the case because Agent Smith is an agent of the Matrix, blah, blah, blah. But then he goes rogue. Could be the story of Lucifer. Lots of other ways to interpret that as well. But I do like the Judas character, right? So because Neo is Christ, he has to eventually sacrifice himself. I mean, I don't remember, after seeing Reloaded, which came out in like the summer of 2003, and then they waited until November to release Revolutions of that year. I don't know if I was thinking in the summer of 2003 that, he's Christ, and so he's got to sacrifice himself for the good of everyone else. But I mean, looking back on it in hindsight, and I do recognize this is hindsight, knowing now what I didn't know then, that it's pretty obvious that they were setting up Neo to have to sacrifice himself. Not so much in the first film, but definitely in Reloaded and Revolutions. And of course, at the end of Revolutions, he does ultimately sacrifice himself to end the human-robot wars, which we learn in Resurrections has lasted. They did reboot the Matrix. They did not kill Neo and Trinity. They actually resurrected them. Hence the name Matrix Resurrections. But you saw the trailer for that, so that's not really a spoiler. It's really an explanation as to how they're alive still. Maybe that's a spoiler, maybe that's not a spoiler, but in any case, Christ, the Christ-like figure, has to sacrifice himself, and so Neo does. He also does this in the first Matrix film, obviously more blatant in the follow-ups, in the sequels. But in the first film, he has to die before he becomes the one. He doesn't really sacrifice himself, so to speak, but he does die. And when he wakes up, he's like, I am the Matrix. Hence, I am God, right? But here's the fun detail about that. Trinity basically gives him true love's kiss for him to wake up at the end of the first film to come back to life. She kisses him in the real world, which jumpstarts his brain in the Matrix, and he defies the programming of the Matrix because he is the one. Of course, we find out later in Reloaded, the second film, that this is all an elaborate way to deal with humans rejecting several incarnations of the Matrix. So they create this program that runs on a loop, basically, and every time that program resets, a new incarnation of the Matrix is then born, and this whole one program repeats itself. So it's like, whoa, that's crazy. But that's essentially what it is. And so there's your religious allegory. I mean, I can't really say too much more about, I mean, there's a ton more to say, but I can't really say too much more without like getting into the super weeds of it all. I remember reading I don't think people understand how much I spent reading about the Matrix in 2003 and 2004. A lot of time. Now, I wish those sites still existed, those early fan base forums. I really wish those sites existed. I really wish that the internet still was kind of like that, where you could just spend hours about talking about things that didn't really matter with complete strangers, and you didn't feel like you were gonna go crazy, which is what the internet is like today. Howdy. Thanks for listening to this episode. We hope you're enjoying the conversation. Over the past 2 years, the podcast has grown, and that's mostly in part to folks like you, the listeners. We've also had wonderful luck receiving support from the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, APA Division II Small Partnerships Grant. It's been a fun ride, and we want to keep it going. So we need your help. There are several ways that you can support this show. You can share episodes with your social media networks so we can grab new listeners. You can join our fledgling Patreon program. You can contribute directly using PayPal, or you can purchase some sweet merchandise with our logo at our Spreadshirt merch store. All of those things can be found on the website cinemapsychpod.swanpsych.com. But perhaps the best thing that you can do is to keep listening and leave us feedback on Facebook or Twitter so we know you've listened. Thanks. And now back to the show. So the third topic that I wanted to talk about in this episode is perhaps the sticking out like a sore thumb topic, which is simulation theory. Yeah. You didn't think I was going to talk about that one, but yeah, obviously. Why wouldn't I talk about the Matrix and simulation theory? Would that be too on the nose? Yes, it would be. And we're going to do it. We're going to do it. Obviously, we're going to do it. Okay, so simulation theory. What is it? Well, it's actually a fascinating topic, and I think going to the Wikipedia article is a good place to start. So the first film came out in the late 90s, right? So it was being written and developed in, that time period when the internet was new and computers were just getting in the hands of everybody. I mean, the 90s were a great time to have any kind of association with the early days of this tech. And now it's so ubiquitous. You're listening to this podcast episode on a tiny little device that is far more powerful than it was, 25 years ago, right? And so we have this initial idea of what a computer simulation is, right? With the internet. They got a lot of stuff right. I will give credit to the Wachowskis about what they thought the internet was going to be like. I mean, who'd have thought everybody would want to just have avatars of who they are in real life? I mean, that's awesome. Talking with people, instant connections. I mean, it took a little while for instant connections, of course, but now we have them. All right. So why not write a story about how we're all living in some kind of simulation? That's what the heart of simulation theory or simulation hypothesis is all about. This idea of living in a created space. So this is the definition. It's a proposal that regards the nature of existence, that says all of existence, every single thing, is an artificial simulation, like a computer simulation, but doesn't necessarily have to be a a computer simulation. As far as I'm aware, some folks have argued that to consider the fact that we are living in a simulation, quote unquote. I'm obviously not saying that we are. I don't believe that we are. I'll just throw that out on the table. I don't think that we are living in a simulation, and I think that, as I'll mention, I think that the argument defeats itself immediately. But in any case, just to give it its fair share, to be charitable about the simulation hypothesis, with respect to the film, of course, is that it's constraining. So the idea here is that to think it's a computer simulation, which is what the Matrix is. They interface with it as a simulation, or as a computer simulation. That idea, though, broadly speaking, is more constraining than the possibility of organic kinds of simulations, which we are organic beings, and so maybe that's the kind of simulation that we are in. Simulated realities, that's the Matrix. Proposed technology, or any other kinds of things associated with a simulated reality, would be able to convince its inhabitants, its participants, that the simulation is real. So, to put it another way, some people believe, and some people argue, that we are living in a Matrix-like simulation. Doesn't necessarily have to be computer-based. Doesn't have to be that metaphor. But that we are in some sort of simulation. Okay? Running through some kind of set of algorithms that is eventually going to end. I guess. It's a little far for me to go right now. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, although a big influence on the story is, of course, Through the Looking Glass by C.S. Lewis. Noted theologian. Very, very religious man. So, I mean, there's no surprise here that the inspiration that comes from Through the Looking Glass and Alice in Wonderland also has a religious bent to it because of the writer. So we're all living in a simulation. Of course, the Matrix is about living in a simulation. And that the simulation seems real, feels real, is real. And the red and blue pill choice is a choice of accepting one's current reality or broadening one's mind to the simulation. Essentially pulling oneself out of the simulation. There are three premises to simulation theory, and rather than talking about those three rules, I want to say that physicists and noted physicists, Paul Davies, has said that these three assumptions, I guess we'll call them, is called the trilemma. And the argument essentially reduces the trilemma, the fact that humans live in a simulation, which is the third proposition, the third assumption of the trilemma, essentially reduces itself down to what is called a near infinite multiverse, because there would have to be someone running the simulation. There would have to be some kind of entity running that simulation, and maybe there is some entity running the simulation that's running the simulation, and then running the simulation that's running the simulation, and blah, 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 blah. And you end up with a principle called reductio ad absurdum, which is essentially, well, reductio ad absurdum means reduce to absurdity. And the idea here is that if I'm going to create a situation where some post-human species or some post-human entities are running some kind of simulation on human time, then what stops that post-human civilization from also running a simulation on it becomes ridiculous at this point. This idea of a simulation gets pretty shaky and can be reduced to absurdity. And Paul Davies, physicist, goes on to argue that the simulation hypothesis, the idea that humans, that there exists a simulation and that humans are in it, like the Matrix, to be self-defeating. Like it eats itself. And the interesting thing is, I connect it to an idea that I've been really a big fan of in recent years, which is, especially since I've been teaching sensation and perception, which is the idea that we all exist. Animals, everything that exists in an objective reality adjacent reality. So there could be an objective reality. A Matrix kind of idea would suggest that can be curated. Cypher talking about the steak and the fact that he knows that the steak is just code, but it tastes so good. That subjective reality can be curated within this simulation idea. But that the reality that we are in is the reality that we are in. But we don't perceive it as the reality that everyone else is in. So we are all reality adjacent. It may be what it may be. It's a very important choice of words. It may be what it may be, but we're never going to get to see that as individuals. And this idea, I think, fits nicely with even like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? Which is you don't know a thing's position or something's superposition. I don't remember. I'm not a physicist. But the idea that if you observe something's momentum, you can't observe its position. And if you observe its position, you can't observe its momentum. Beautiful. It's a beautiful message. And that's why I think, thanks for coming to my TED Talk. We are not in a simulation. That's, I know that doesn't make any sense. But what I'm trying to say is that the Matrix isn't real. And since 1999, people have been saying, "My God, what if the Matrix is real?" And I really want them to shut up. I really need people to stop saying, "What if the Matrix is real?" Yeah, it's called your brain. It is called your brain, and you have so many biases to thank for it. You are in your own personal Matrix. Congratulations, you played yourself. Stop saying, please, what if the Matrix was real? What if we're in the Matrix right now? We are not. And if we are, what are you going to do about it? You going to go find Morpheus? You're going to go find Morpheus? You're going to be like, "Can I have a blue pill? I mean, can I have a red pill?" No, you're not. What if the Matrix was real?
Is the construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulations, anything we need.
Right now, we're inside a computer program.
Is it really so hard to believe? Your clothes are different, the plugs in your arms and head are gone. Your hair has changed. Your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. This is the world that you know. The world as it was at the end of the 20th century. It exists now only as part of a neural interactive simulation that we call the Matrix. You've been living in a dream world, Neo.
Okay, a couple of other psych concepts that I wanted to talk about that came up at various points of the films and various places and that kind of thing. They don't really have thematic qualities that fit a psychological perspective. They're just really cool psych concepts that I love that are sprinkled throughout that aren't really addressed in other movies, or at least addressed as interestingly as they are in this set of films. So, like I said, these are not connected to any broad major themes. They're just random little things. And then we'll end the episode. And so yeah, Deja Vu. This one's so fun. So in the movie, it's represented as the Matrix changing something, right? There's some sort of quote unquote glitch in the Matrix. And so it represents something to outsiders, right? As in like, oh crap, they just changed something. We're in trouble. So like we need to make sure we get out of here. And it's represented in the film as the literal same thing that occurs. So the first thing that Neo sees is he sees a black cat go through as they're walking past a hallway archway. He sees a black cat go past, shake its head, and as they're going up the stairs, he hears the jingle of the cat again, and it's doing the exact same thing. And he goes, "Oh, deja vu." And they're like, "What? What did you say?" And then, of course, they get to the door that they're trying to get to, and it's a brick wall. So they changed something. And in real life, deja vu is the inexplicable, so unexplainable feeling of familiarity about an experience that you think you may have had. So deja vu is really all it is a sense of familiarity that has no source. So you're like, that seems familiar to me. Something in my memory is pinging me, but there's no source for that ping. And what I mean by source is that, okay, I know that the Wachowskis directed the film. How do I know that? Well, the source of that information came from the film itself, right? The credits. That's a source of information. So deja vu in the real world is experience of inexplicable familiarity. Can't explain the source. It's a source monitoring error, technically. And so in the Matrix, I love how they use this idea of like this unexplainable sense that something is familiar, and they turn it on its head and they're like, no. It's familiar because it was the exact same thing. You did experience this before, my friend. And of course, they had to bring that idea into the plot as a plot device. And so it represents, stuff's going to go down. Uh-oh. Right? So that's one of my favorite little ideas as somebody who is not necessarily a memory researcher, but is very fond of the psychological aspects of memory. I love talking about memory. It's so wild. The second one that I wanted to talk about is residual self-image. So in the movie, Morpheus, as Mr. Exposition Dump, is explaining to Neo why after he got out of the Matrix and looks completely like naked with a bunch of holes in his head, and then eventually his hair grows back and he's got a shaved head, a little bit shorter than what I've got going on right now. He explains to Neo that, oh, you don't have any of your holes or anything like that, and your hair is all back to where it is because this is called residual self-image. The idea behind residual self-image is that this is what we think we look like in the Matrix. This is what we think we are expressing to other people. And so when Neo goes back into the Matrix for the first time and he's got no holes and stuff like that, is because not only is that what he wants to be, which is why the character of Switch would have been so cool, with Switch being played by a male in the real world and by a female in the Matrix. That would have been so cool for the Trans Allegory because of the residual self-image part. We all have self-images. Everyone has a concept and a photograph. If you are among the folks who can mentally image, right? You have fantasia, not aphantasia. You can picture yourself in your head. And so one of the things that I find myself doing sometimes is wondering, how do I look to the person that I'm talking to? It's like, do I have something on my mouth? How does my beard look? Are my eyes glazing over? All those kinds of things. And the reason why I probably do that quite a bit is because I'm constantly looking at my students' faces and looking for clues like, do they get what I'm saying? Are they bored? Do they not get what I'm saying? Are they laughing because I just told a joke? And the idea here is that we think about that. And so when we make a major change, so when I first started growing a beard about 7 years ago, right, it took a while for the image in my head to be like, oh, I've got a beard on my face that changes the way that I look to other people. And it took a while for it to update. The interesting thing is that one of the clearer aspects of this is when a couple of summers ago, I grew out my beard quite a bit, which was ill-advised during the summer. But in any case, I did. I was like, I don't want to trim. I am done with school for the semester, and I'm just going to see how big I can get it. Ill-advised for the summertime. But it took me a while to be like, why are people like staring at my face? This is pre-COVID. Staring at my face because, I had this giant bushy beard, and it's not normally what it was. So it took a while for my self-image to update in my mind. Now I can imagine that if I shaved my beard, which I'm not going to do, if I shaved my beard, how long would it take me to be like, oh, I don't have a beard on my face anymore? So that to me is so lovely. And they play a couple of features of this on it or in the movie, which, the real world is full of haggard people. They're dirty, they're dingy, things aren't well lit, things feel like they're falling apart all the time. And then when you go into the Matrix, it's all like, lovely. It feels flashier and fancier, and it's played upon quite a bit in Matrix Reloaded, where the three of them have to go and speak to the Merovingian in his fancy French chateau, and they go to the restaurant inside the chateau, and then they fight people in the chateau, that kind of thing. It's very, the Matrix seems clean and refined, whereas the real world is bleh, 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 bleh. And so when you go into the Matrix, it's like, yeah, I'm looking good. I'm looking sweet with this leather and these sunglasses. I mean, sunglasses maketh the man, right? And that's not manners, it's sunglasses. Sunglasses. So I always thought, especially after I learned about self-image and self-concept and all of the self-hyphen ideas in psychology, I always thought this was the really fun part of it, that they're like, oh, it's residual self-image. Obviously now learning about the trans allegory, it makes even much more sense, right? Because it's who we want to express ourselves as opposed to who we are in the real world. And maybe those two things align, maybe they don't. And so let's explore when they don't, right? Because we don't see a lot of difference between Trinity in the real world and in the Matrix. I mean, we don't see a lot between Neo. His hair gets a little bit longer. And we also don't see a lot of difference between Morpheus in the real world and in the Matrix. But we see a huge difference between Cypher in the real world, Cypher in the Matrix, and of course the whole abandoned idea with Switch, so on and so forth. So residual self-image has always been one of my favorite. And then, of course, I love how Lawrence Fishburne says it. Of course. The final one that I wanted to mention is the brain as a computer metaphor that is used throughout the logic, the internal consistency of the film. Of course, humans are portrayed as the battery, so to speak, for the machines. Of course, there have been numerous explorations about how unless you changed human biology in a significant way, we're not very good batteries, but they maybe found a way to be useful, for us to be useful by putting us in the Matrix. I don't know. The architect talks about how, like, there were versions of the Matrix which were utopias and people rejected that. And so maybe if they rejected that, they died, because if you die in the Matrix, you die in the real world, which is one of the weirdest rules ever, because no, you don't die in your dream. You don't die in real life if you die in a dream. Like, no. I know we don't die in dreams, and the reason why we don't die in dreams is because we have no idea what happens after you die. That's why you don't die in dreams. I always thought that was pretty obvious, but we don't die in dreams because we have no idea how to figure that out on a subconscious level. I will. That's a hill I'm willing to die on. If you have a better idea about how why we don't die in our dreams, as I always thought it was convenient that if you died in the Matrix, you died in real life. I always thought that idea was just rather convenient plot device. Like, it doesn't have any basis in reality. Now, there are ways in which our psychology impacts our physiology, sure, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that just because your brain dies doesn't mean you die yourself, or you spit out blood because you're getting punched by somebody in the Matrix. A little bit of science fiction for y'all. But other than that, the brain as a metaphor is really, the sticking of the giant needle in the back of the head to engage the upload, to get back into the Matrix, basically. And that's using this idea of the brain as a computer, that you can connect a computer to it and it then acts like a computer. Our brains are not computers, and in many ways, we don't want them to be computers. There isn't a good reason that I've come across that would suggest that computers are better at navigating our environment than we are, as our brains currently exist. Now, that is not to say that we can't interface with computers. We obviously interface with computers with our fingers, our hands, with our eyes, with our voices. But we can also interface with them directly from our brain. People are making incredible advances in brain-computer interaction. But the fact of the matter is that you cannot get a whole brain interaction with a computer. I don't think that's possible with how our brain distributes processing all throughout it. Granted, the giant stick that gets stuck in the back of your head pretty much goes through all of the parts. I mean, we don't know how far it actually goes into a person's head. There's never been some... I would like to see somebody do a computer animation of like an X-ray, you know, like a real-time X-ray and just, or MRI or something like that, showing how far that pin goes into your skull. Because that would really indicate how much is being touched by that pin, how much of the brain is being touched by that pin. So I always thought it was, well, I shouldn't say I always thought. At first, I thought it was really cool. But since, you know, being steeped within psychology and brain science and things like that, I was like, there's no way this would work. There's no way. It's really weird. Really weird. So you end up with a situation of pure science fiction across all fronts, right? Humans should not be batteries. Humans really can't interface with computers in the way that is being suggested. And I don't think if our evolution continues, I don't think that that's ever going to change. Like, we are slowly evolving, of course, and we have no idea when these films are set in the future. The Matrix is set to 1999, so I don't know. You know, the actual Matrix is like, it's 1999. You know, the time before the millennium and everything went to crap. Yeah, pretty much. It shows a really prime time without even realizing that means it gets worse. Oh, I just had a revelation. An epiphany. You guys, the machine set the Matrix to 1999. It doesn't get better than 1999. Oh no. It really puts this last 22 years into perspective, I'll tell you what. All right. So 1999, the best year apparently. I don't know how far in the future. I don't know. I'm going to call no. That's going to be my expert opinion. No, you cannot stick a metal tube spike into the back of somebody's brain, through their brain. Of course, it does go through their brain, and it's seemingly at the level of like the limbic system, but you would also need like frontal lobe access, and really it's in the middle, it's in the medial portion of the brain, which means it's not getting cortex stuff. And, you know, we have a lot of language processing that only happens on the cortex. So, I mean, it's a bit of a stretch is all I'm saying. Well, with that revelation, I want to thank you all for listening to my trip down memory lane and a little bit of recent stuff with the Matrix Resurrections. But a trip down memory lane, a reason to talk about a film franchise that I do actually kind of love. I mean, like, as a franchise, I do put it up on a pretty high pedestal. So, thank you for listening to this episode. And until the next one, thanks for listening.